Welcome to the Reel Rematch, the podcast where we unpack Hollywood's twin films, sometimes cloned on purpose, sometimes by accident, but always in competition. Today's matchup, Zodiac in the Zeitgeist, the Zodiac versus Zodiac, two true crime thrillers obsessed with the same unsolved murders, released just 2 years apart. Which one cracked the case cinematically? Which one captured the paranoia of a city under siege? And which chilling take on the infamous killer still leaves audiences searching for answers?
G'day, Jess. How you doing, mates?
Jeff, I'm well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed. All right, here we are, another episode. We're going to go a bit deep into a very almost mythical murdering scenario from the US, the Zodiac Killer.
I mean, incredible that this such high-profile serial killer case still to this day remains unsolved, right? Would have to be like one of the, in the pantheon of fantastic, great, unsolved mysteries or cases globally, right? Like, I don't know what the top 5, top 10 is. Clearly, you've probably got Jack the Ripper up there somewhere.
Have to be number one.
Zodiac's got to be up there as well.
Absolutely.
And it was an amazing, not a trip down personal memory lane, but it was just an amazing discovery of, again, two themes. One that dives, probably into the abyss versus one that, jumps into a little splash pool. So, maybe let's talk about why.
Well, yeah, let's look at it as we do. I mean, that's part of why we do this. Is these are two films, same theme, same story almost in their own different way, that are coming out at roughly the same time with the same kind of information to people. So, yeah, why did these happen? Like, obviously, you've got, as we've both looked in our research here, you've got your low budget made by two local guys up in San Francisco region called the Bulkley brothers. One wrote, I think they both wrote it, one directed it. And then obviously you've got your big studio production made by Mr. David Fincher with Warners and Paramount.
And so hit the pause button there just for a second, Jeff, if you don't mind. I don't mean to slow your roll here. I was curious, do you believe that the Zodiac by the Bulkleys would have made more money or been more prominent if it had been, say, a film by the Bulkley brothers? It was marketed as such.
Oh, very good question. I mean, you've got famous brothers who make these films and TV shows together that do.
The Hughes brothers, the Coen brothers.
You've got the Duffer brothers with Stranger Things.
Duffer brothers. There's others, right?
Yeah, like they're probably the big three, let's say.
Oh, the Farrellys? The
Farrellys are brothers, yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So would it have been different? Possibly, because maybe we all like these two brothers who've come up and creatively worked together and can do something together. So,
as they say in Fast and the Furious, it's all about family.
Vin Diesel makes his way to every conversation.
So, I'm sorry, Jeff. I interrupted.
Well, no, I mean, look, obviously these were made together, developed at the same time. I'm not sure about you, but in my research discovered that they were independent of each other, probably because the Bulkleys, being a very low-budget production, probably flew under the radar a lot more than Fincher's film did, given Fincher is a very prominent, well-known director, obviously coming from a big studio. It's something that's announced and pushed and, already not pre-marketed, but you know what I mean, it released into the world as this is a pending upcoming production. So, I mean, looking at it, it does appear that they weren't engaged in any sort of war of words. They were all just trying to get their own films made. No accusations against anything. There was no real commentary made by anybody. I mean, look, Justin Chalmers, who was the lead in the Zodiac, which we'll talk about later, did say that he was aware of a new film coming up made by Fincher and starring Jake Gyllenhaal. But there was never really anything said or discussed by Fincher's film or the cast when they went through their press junket scenario. So in terms of because we always look into this, why did this happen? Were they made together? I found that it became, interestingly for me, and this is what I found, is that both sets of filmmakers were well aware and knew about the Zodiac because they came from that part of the world. right? So the Bulkleys grew up close to San Francisco and where it was and remember it affecting things and remember the myth of the man and the myth of the story and parents almost like a boogeyman scenario. Yeah. So they wanted to look at it from that perspective and how it affected the family scenario, and that's where their film comes through. Fincher, there's a great, I don't even know if I wrote the quote, where he remembers his old man was blunt and said to him when he was asking why he was taking the bus that day or to be careful on the bus that day, and his old man was like, yeah, because there's some guy out there who's threatened to shoot out the tyres and kill everyone on your school bus, right? And so Fincher was going to school during the period of Zodiac letters and Zodiac threats and Zodiac fear in that sort of Northern California area. So
there we've got it, is both films were, really had their origins in whether or not it was childhood trauma or kind of like just a shared kind of, history, through childhood, through a connection of being geographically in the same area where these horrible crimes were committed, that left a huge outsized imprint on them and obviously the communities that they lived in. And, fast forward, 20, 30 years, and they both decide to make, films about the Zodiac as the, subject matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
I mean, there's something else, right, is that what was also happening, broader kind of like mid-2000s, and in all fairness, I think filmmakers like David Fincher would have kind of kicked this off because, you recall like in the 90s, out of nowhere, there was like all these films about, serial killers, right? And, Fincher obviously came out with, Seven, which is it's still one of my favourite films of the 90s.
Oh, it's iconic. Absolutely iconic film.
But like, it started just to, I think, build in momentum and understanding. And then, obviously there was, a lot of authors just writing, literary texts who were also focusing on, just serial killers and otherwise. And it really started to grow in that sort of like mid-2000s. And like, even if, the focus on true crime, the fixation on serial killers, and even if we just focus on the Zodiac, that we chose the Zodiac and Zodiac, right? Because, they were probably the two best ones we could stand side by side. But what I also found is that around circa the same time that the Zodiac came out in 2005, there was also a low-budget exploitation film called Zodiac Killer, right? Director was Uli Lamel. I hope I'm pronouncing that person's name correctly. And there was also then another independent project called The Zodiac Killer by Charles Edelman in the same year, right? So this like cluster of these films about the Zodiac, again, that's literally a zeitgeist moment, right?
Yeah.
Where, again, this true crime, interest and serial killer fascination is growing, and life reflects art and art is reflecting life. And I think that some of the factors that probably fed this trend is being true crime is entertainment.
Yeah.
Like my mother-in-law loves true crime, so does my wife, right? They're fascinated by it. And like, it's the shock horror. How can they? How would they? But they can't peel themselves away, which is crazy because, I could never show, I don't think my wife would sit down and like watch, Seven into it, right? She'd probably leave the room at some stage, right?
Yes.
What's in the box? But then also people are fascinated by mysteries.
Yeah.
Right. And, something that is, that has that, cultural infamy and the fact that it's unsolved, there's this timeless allure around anything like that. And it keeps, keep getting relitigated, reinterrogated, right? Anyone think, I've got to solve, I've got to fix or whatever, right? It's like sunken treasure or something, people are they're drawn to it like moths to a flame.
Yeah.
So, and then I think, with the passage of time being, 30 to 40 years since those killers, the next generation kind of comes in and they've got their own fresh perspectives about it. And that's like the Bulkleys and Fincher, right? So, so I think, again, it's really zeitgeist moment, right? And, there's no way knowing that Fincher was, reading from anyone's playbook, so he doesn't have to. Or if he does, he's going to do it in a very sort of elegant way, like, when he's making things like, Gone Girl, and he's done a more twisted version of Hitchcock or whatever, right?
Yes.
But it's very obvious what he's doing and how he's doing it.
Yeah.
Did you find anything else as to, why these two films at the same time or?
No, I couldn't. I mean, again, they'd been trying to get them done. Again, obviously, because Fincher's Zodiac is based on Graysmith's book, the character that Jake Gyllenhaal plays, right? So he'd sold the rights to the book years before to actually screenwriter Shane Salerno, who we've discussed in previous pods, but off the top of my head, I can't remember who'd done. He actually pitched his original pitch off the back of buying Graysmith's books was to the Zodiac Killer's now back and active in Los Angeles. So to make it a current kind of thrillery mystery that's going on in LA. Obviously, the studios rejected that. So James Vanderbilt, who ended up writing this, had been, again, massively obsessed when he was in high school, grew up in that region, had seen it, had read all of Graysmith's books, and then he met him at another screening of a film, had a chat, and he ended up selling the rights to Vanderbilt because they'd gone to Salerno but reverted back to Graysmith. So he ended up selling him to Vanderbilt for Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked, which was his sequel to his original true crime story, right? And then he set it up with Mike Metaboy, who's a famous producer at Phoenix Pictures. And at the very start, they'd just come off the back of Seven, watching Seven. It was around that time they wanted to make, because of the darkness within the book, they wanted to make a film along those lines. And so they took it to Fincher, and then obviously Fincher, as we've already said, and his own obsession, what happened to him as a kid going through that whole scenario, instantly went, yep, let's do it. He was interested and wanted to do it. And actually it got delayed a little bit because, well, he wanted to do it but couldn't because he was trying to make the Black Dahlia. For years Fincher's been trying to make the Black Dahlia based on another famous killer thing from the 30s in Hollywood. That fell over, and so he went on to make this.
And as you know, I love Brian De Palma, and he made the Black Dahlia what it was like roughly a decade later. And not that De Palma I grew up loving. Like there's still moments of brilliance and what have you in that, but I would have loved to have seen, either like Curtis Hanson, circa LA Confidential, to be honest, right? And or Fincher do that versus De Palma. Like if De Palma had have done that, in the 80s or early 90s, 100%.
Oh, different film entirely.
So can I just rewind to Shane Salerno to add to that research? And I don't know the veracity of this or not, but apparently Shane Salerno, he was only 19 years old when he optioned that book.
Wow, didn't know that.
I'm just thinking, reflecting upon myself, Jeff, misspent youth. Salerno, because, right, is that, to your point, he was developing with Graysmith for several years and he sold it to Disney's Touchstone Pictures in a 7-figure deal, right? And that's incredible.
Yeah.
Like, not 19. It's like, oh, hey, have you read the latest, insert comic book title or pulp fiction type novel by some, disposable airport sort of like author or whatever.
Yeah.
Like this guy at 19, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to option a book.
Yeah. And then write a script and sell it for plus $1 million.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how they both happened. And again, I think whereas the Bulkley brothers just developed theirs independently, it was a low budget feature, they just got independent financing to make them.
So I've got another, again, when we're talking about maybe some similarities and, how what the genesis of these projects were. Obviously, we've covered inspirations, and otherwise. But one fascinating thing that, obviously jumps out is one of the greatest character actors of all time, Philip Baker Hall, appears in both movies.
Yeah, that's right. That was because, again, looking at the way we do this and what's the similarities, what's in it, but actually have an actor in both films. I don't think we've accounted that yet.
I think we did, but it was like a voice actor in Finding Nemo and Shark Tale.
Yes, that might have been the one.
But you're right. I mean, it's I don't think it's super rare.
Yeah.
And again, if it has happened, it's like it's not to the prominence of someone like a Philip Baker Hall. And it's amazing because in both films, like one, he's firmly in the side of the law, right, being a sheriff.
Yep.
In the Zodiac, but then in Zodiac, he's like contracting to the police, right? And I think like Ruffalo's got some form of engagement with him, if it's not the SFD more broadly, right? So that was interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Like looking at it and just going, wait a minute, Philip Baker Hall's in both of these films,
And in my mind at least, for the many gifts that Paul Thomas Anderson has given us, I think it was also like, bringing Philip Baker Hall back into the public consciousness and otherwise, or at least, placing him firmly on the radar where, because I think he's appeared in just about all of PTA's, or at least some of his early to mid-career work. And it's just always phenomenal.
Yeah.
It shoots the lights out. So, yeah, it was great to see him in both.
Yeah, no, it was. Definitely.
So listen, Jeff, why don't you run the numbers for us?
All right, let's go through. So the thing about the Zodiac, they say 2005, 2006, was technically shot in 2005, actually wasn't released until March 2006. That's when it first came out. And ironically, Zodiac came out pretty much bang on a year later in 2007. So now, while we have two similarly themed stories of the Zodiac murders and the investigations, we have polar opposites when it comes to box office figures.
Yeah.
There's no similarity whatsoever.
So, look, not just box office, but the filmmakers. I mean, let's actually address the elephant in the room because we haven't touched it. In the blue corner or red corner, I mean, pick one. Right, in the blue corner, you've got the Bulkley brothers.
Yeah.
Right. In the red corner, you've got David Fincher.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'm not really too down on kind of, boxing parlance, but it's like a featherweight versus a super heavyweight, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Or it's like, you've got Justin on a basketball court who's cognizant as to what a basketball court is and what a basketball is meant to do and the objective of the game and, roughly how that works, and he has a love of basketball.
Yeah.
Right? And then on the opposing side, you've got Kobe Bryant. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, that's why it's almost like an unfair comparison. And I'm not trying to punch down on the Bulkley brothers because guess what? They did something that not many people have ever been able to do, and that's actually, produce a feature film and get it released.
I mean, that's the thing. Well, I know we look at these things and we always say that, but the one thing I think we both agree on is no matter what it is, even if a film is not fantastic or not well received or in whatever way it is, they made a film, which is an endeavour and a half to do. We've both done it. We've both tried it. We know exactly what has to go into making these things. We've worked on productions in our lives. We know how these things go, and we know that it's a tough thing to undertake and a tough thing to complete as well. So I applaud them from that perspective. But yeah, all right. But let's look at the actual numbers. So the Zodiac, the Bulkley Brothers film, was only released on 10 screens as a limited release, and took in a whopping $45,000 in the first 2 weeks it was open. It had a limited DVD release after that, but there's no actual figures on what kind of numbers it made. So it only had a budget of $1 million, still considered a flop, let's say, from that perspective. Then obviously you got the Zodiac. Fincher, big studio, whatever. Bigger budget, bigger cast, bigger team behind it, opened wide on 2,300 screens. Took 14 mil opening weekend. Ended its domestic run with 33 million. Internationally it did slightly better, took another 50 million for a worldwide tally of about 83 million. However, it also had a massive budget of $85 million. So it basically returned 1-to-1 for the studio. Again, these are both films that came out during the physical media age, DVDs. There's no record of the Zodiac, but the Zodiac did take another $21.5 million in DVD sales.
And look, I've got no stats to back this up, right? But I would suggest, on balance, Zodiac, Fincher Zodiac, underperformed at the box office, but I think has probably been, critically by audiences and otherwise reevaluated as another one of his masterworks, right? I don't think, even Fight Club wasn't massively, championed when it first came out and had grown in stature since.
Absolutely.
I think one of his most successful films straight out of the gate was like his second film, which was, Seven, right? But I think this is another one of his films that has just grown in stature as the years go by, where people, have really come to realize and relish in the genius and the filmmaking, talent that David Fincher, just has in abundance.
Yeah, I agree. And looking again, doing my research on this, it's most people agree that this is considered one of his best films. Just because of what it is, how he's made it, just the depth of detail and love that he's put into this film is incredible. Absolutely. So, yeah. So
critically and audience-wise, was there love for both films?
Well, okay. Yes and no. So again, it's a bit of the minnow and the whale here. So unfortunately, the Zodiac sits at 24% on Rotten Tomatoes. Not a great result by any stretch. 5.5 out of 10 on IMDb, but a Metacritic score of only 21. So not universally liked. Zodiac has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, sitting there from critics, 7.7 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 79 on Metacritic, so a lot more respected. But then when you get, again, and that's also reflected then when you get to the audience response. So the Zodiac sits at 39% on the Popcornometer on RT, whereas the Zodiac sits at 77%. So again, Min on the Whale, a lot more love for Zodiac than the Zodiac.
So look, talking about personally how I review both films, for what it's worth, the Zodiac by the Bulkleys I thought it had, I mean, effectively the foundations of what could have been just a super solid, like, like straight to video, like, streaming film. I guess now could have been they could have lent more into the indie and made it more of an independent film.
Mm.
So, and by that, and this is me spitballing, but, I love like the fact they're trying to go for an intimate, sort of a family portrayal and how it impacts the community and otherwise. But I felt it was really superficial the way they did that.
I 100% agree with you.
If they had have really leaned into that a lot more, and then potentially like, do some like, fever dream, obsession, hallucination, sort of like small sequences, with this guy starting to think that he can see in the mind of whatever, but he's just kind of going crazy and he's blinded by his obsession or whatever it is. I mean, there's people much more, creative and smarter and otherwise, but they didn't really lean into that. And it's almost like, look, I understand that you're wanting to tell a story that had a huge impact to you and your communities you lived in. And it was obviously that childhood experience and otherwise, and focusing on, a much smaller sort of, canvas than what Fincher was doing was the right move for you. But it didn't quite all come together. But there was still stuff to like, right? And there's still moments that I liked it. And I thought that you really could have done something with that. But, they kind of set the table and then they didn't really, then you only got an entree, you didn't get the main course.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like they didn't lean into, it's almost like they were a bit indecisive which way to push it, right? It's like, do we fully lean into the story of how this affected families, which I think they were aiming for, but I don't think they got there, like you said. But then trying to show him and his obsession with solving the crime, I also didn't think got there. He just kind of became a dick.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like the Justin Chalmers, the detective Parrish, he just became an asshole.
Yeah.
And so there was like a gap between trying to say who he is, pushing into the actual obsession part. It's like they skipped that bit. It's almost like here's a detective who's I want to solve, I got to get it, I have to solve this case. And then all of a sudden, this obsession part, and they missed a portion of that somewhere in the middle. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I saw it.
Yeah, look, yeah. I mean, I think it had great potential, and I think they did some things quite well. And, I mean, not everything comes together, right?
Hey, they tried.
So, look, let's talk a little bit now, as we do, about, the director, right? What I found was interesting, this was literally the sole feature film. And his debut. So, one and done.
Yeah.
Right? But what was fascinating to me is that he's had an amazingly successful career as a producer.
Yeah, I found that as well.
So he produced the TV series Robot Chicken, BoJack Horseman, an all-time favourite of mine.
I think
BoJack. You love BoJack as well.
Absolutely.
And Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio that came out in 2022.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, like, wow. Right? And who would have thought from a film like this? So again, like, talent in spades, right? And obviously channel that into, obviously the work of producing. So there's nothing really further I've got on that. But if I go down the line and start talking about, some of the key cast, right? So Justin Chambers, who is the central protagonist in the Zodiac, he does this and commences a 16-season run on Grey's Anatomy.
There you go.
In 2005.
Yeah.
So he also appears in the Samuel L. Jackson thriller Lakeview Terrace in 2008.
Yep.
Which it's actually a guilty pleasure movie of mine. I love seeing, like a nasty bad, like Samuel L. Jackson character. And it was like, like one of those really, sort of like taut, low budget, sort of like thrillers. Takes me back to the love of the million thrillers they did through, the late 80s to the late 90s.
I wish they made those again because they were great. They were, like you said, guilty pleasures, those films.
Well, now, like you do get them, but their appeal is too broad and they're not nasty enough, or they're nasty for the sake of being nasty on, like, the streaming services.
Yeah. But
yeah, we've missed something there. Hopefully they can go back and try and recapture some of that, like those adult thrillers, right? So the other thing for me is, I guess, the other actor, or like main actor, is Robert Tunney.
Yep.
Now, I'll always remember her when she kind of exploded onto the scene in The Craft in 1996. Loved her in The Craft, right? Yeah. But anyway, she starred in this film in 2005 and also commenced a 2-season run on Prison Break, same year.
Yes.
So, and the only other person of note in the key cast category would be the lesser-known Culkin brother, Rory, right? So not Kieran, not Macaulay, but Rory, right? So he's the youngest member of the Culkin clan. And most memorably, for me at least, in terms of what I actually remember him, was Shyamalan's, maybe I'm butchering the pronunciation of his surname, but Signs in 2002.
Yeah,
right?
with Mel Gibson.
Again, Rory Culkin's, he's always working, but predominantly indie or low to mid-budget films, right? The only other cast, as I go further down the line, is William Mapother.
Well, actually, can I tell you the way my notes? Sorry, I know. Please talk about William Mapother in a second. I noted this cast is almost like, to quote one of our other favourite podcasts, The Rewatchables, this is like a film of that guys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Justin Chalmers, Rex Lynn, who's his partner, who's the bad guy out of Cliffhanger, and you've seen him he's in everything. William Mapother, Rory Culkin, right? Like you said. Anyway, yeah, that's what I kind of define this film as. It's a film of that guys, to quote The Rewatchables. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
No, I think that's a great observation. 100%, Jeff. And or maybe less charitably, William Mapother, he's usually working, but his kind of, credit profile, he's between 8 and 14 on the casting sheet.
Yeah, right.
But famously, and the reason I'm calling him out is Jeff, Tom Cruise's cousin.
I was going to say, he has. I even looked at this, reading his name and going, it's got to be the link, and I never looked into it. Okay, he is. Fair enough. Good.
So obviously we've talked about the great Philip Baker Hall, like one of the best character actors with an incredible 5-decade-long career. And that's it, really. I mean, you talked about Rex Lynn as well, but that was it for cast, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we jump over? And again, it's like we're going from, again, if I can sort of extend the basketball metaphor, we're going from, a basketball team like, the Doncaster Doncats, right, to sort of like the 90s Chicago Bulls.
Right? I say Jordan's Chicago Bulls team? Okay. Right.
But look, let's start with the man, David Fincher. I mean, he's coming off Panic Room in 2002. He does this in 2007. He follows it with The Curious Case of Benjamin Button in 2008, and then delivers probably one of his best films, at least for mine, in The Social Network in 2010. So again, this early stage of his career, he almost couldn't do any wrong, right? I do admit I've rewatched all of his films except for The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, because that didn't really capture my imagination. Yeah. Not to say it wasn't like a bad film and not done well, no, because I think David Fincher's incapable of, producing a bad film, but just wasn't to my taste. It wasn't sensibility, I guess. The cast. Now,
do we have time?
Look, what's really interesting about this is Gyllenhaal. It starts off, for me at least, almost as like the audience avatar, right? And like your fears, insecurities and doubts and the way that you engage in the content, the mystery, what's going on. You see it through, the sort of, nebbish, nerdish kind of, eyes and sort of passive or impassive face of Gyllenhaal's Graysmith.
Yeah.
Right. And the start of the film, it kind of belongs more to, Ruffalo and Downey Jr., right? But then the last third, it's all Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
Right. So I thought that was really interesting. But Gyllenhaal is coming off a bit of a run in this movie. Like, he does The Day After Tomorrow in 2004, Brokeback Mountain and Jarhead in 2005. He does this in 2007. And then he goes all like video game / almost superhero in The Prince of Persia in 2010. And they get a bit of a guilty pleasure. I never thought it was like super awesome and otherwise, but, I remember watching others play Prince of Persia like when I was young and really admiring that, because, anything, that had some sense of like, hey, it's in some exotic land in the Middle East, set in history somewhere, hey, I'm in. Right? Yeah. I love that sort of content. Mark Ruffalo, right? This is around about the time that I feel that he was popping up in everything, like everything. So, we see him in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Collateral, and 13 going on 30, all in 2004. And he does Just Like Heaven with Reese Witherspoon and Rumour Has It with both Kevin Costner and Jennifer Aniston in 2005. He does this in 2007. So, he was in a lot, right? And then, not shortly after then he becomes the Hulk. So Robert Downey Jr., this is like really him, going back up the escalator or the lift, I guess, in terms of his career reascension. Yeah. Obviously, he has Kiss Kiss Bang Bang right, which we both love, came out in 2005. He does this in 2007, and then he follows this by becoming Iron Man in 2008.
So normal.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the other cast. Now, we've got one of our boys that we'll always affectionately know as Goose in Anthony Edwards.
Yes.
So he does this in 2007, and then he pops up for one more episode as Dr. Mark Green in ER to add to his previous 178 episodes / 7 seasons as that character. Always love seeing him. Love seeing him with the wig that he had on in this. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was good with a full head of hair.
Brian Cox, the irrepressible Brian Cox, amazing, right?
Yeah.
What an amazing 6-decade career he's had. It's possible, but in saying that, he's probably best known for one of his most recent roles, obviously, as Logan Roy in Succession, right?
Yeah.
But he had amazing performances, in The Bourne Identity, came out in 2002, X2, X-Men United in 2003, Rewind, and you've got him in Rushmore in 98, Braveheart 96, go back a decade, he obviously pops up as Hannibal Lecter in Manhunter,
yep.
right?
Yes.
In 86. So the other person that I've also got down, I've got two others, but one was actually three. One is John Carroll Lynch. So talking about that guy, he's an amazing that guy for me. What an incredible character actor. Again, 4-decade career. Notably was in Fargo in 96, the Drew Carey Show from 97 to 2004, and Gran Torino by 2008. Arguably probably one of Eastwood's last great films, right? I mean, he's made good films, but I think that's one of his last great films.
Yeah, yeah.
Chloe Sevigny, who obviously starred in Kids back in 95, Boys Don't Cry 99, and was nominated for an Oscar for her performance in that one. And then American Psycho in 2000, she pops up as Gyllenhaal's wife, and is incredible. And then we've got Elias Koteas, another great character actor who's always in work. But for me personally, he peaked playing Casey Jones in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that came out in 1990.
No, I remember seeing, because it's like, again, this was a film of people you've seen and you go, yeah, I know Elias Koteas. Like Donald Logue's in this as well. Solid, been around for decades, done a whole bunch of stuff, So, yeah, there's a whole bunch. It's almost, to me, it's almost like every role in this film was someone you'd seen in a film before. Not just in one film, but numerous films that were, let's say, not A-list actors, but well-known Hollywood actors, right?
I mean, absolutely. And look, let's, talking about, real-life inspiration, we both know this is about, one of the most famous, infamous, unsolved serial killer cases globally. To your point, Fincher's Zodiac was actually based on Robert Graysmith's book, Zodiac Unmasked, The Identity of America's Most Elusive Serial Killer Revealed. That's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. I'm glad he didn't call the film that.
Now, the other connective tissue, and this is more to our pod and our themes, Jeff, I've got another one for you.
Okay.
The writer of Zodiac, James Vanderbilt.
Yes.
He also wrote White House Down.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So I love that, just as another sort of connective tissue to the show.
And all one giant web.
Just the ecosystem, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Connections upon connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I couldn't find, unless you've got anything, I couldn't find any Aussie connections at all.
I must admit, I couldn't either. There wasn't any Aussie connections that I could see in here. No doubt, I bet you if we look down and search some crew somewhere, there was a grip or a gaffer or someone who's probably an Aussie, but I don't think we don't normally dive to that depth. Even the guy making tea and coffee could have been from Australia. Who knows? So
exactly. So look, maybe what we can do next is, do you have any memorable scenes or shots or otherwise from either film that you'd like to wax lyrical on?
Do you know what? Probably the favourite scene for me out of this, which kind of touched on the obsession, but then also touched on the just, I guess it was the fear that was going into it, is when that scene when Gyllenhaal goes to the projectionist, can't remember his name, the projectionist's house. He tracks down the guy who was the projectionist who was asked to hold the home movie for Lee Allen, the guy who essentially they kind of put as the killer by the end. And when he goes to his house and he has the basement, and it just looks like a scene from Seven practically. It's all dark and dingy. The tension that is in that scene, that Fincher builds in that scene, the paranoia, the fear that slowly builds in Gyllenhaal all the way through is just Like, my heart was racing in that film, in that scene. So
It felt like a horror movie. Right?
yeah, at that point it was basically like he was waiting for the guy to come out with a Scream style kitchen knife and just take Gyllenhaal apart. So yeah, and just the fear of the man running up the stairs doing it, and then which again set up payoff. The guy actually locks the door when he walks in the house anyway, and then Gyllenhaal's like trying to get out. It's like, hey, just let me out. Like, I mean, yeah, that's probably the peak tension scene for me between all of it. So
No, it was incredible. And there's also a really nice payoff towards the end of the film, right? Where Gyllenhaal encounters, is it Arthur Lee Allen? Or
yeah, Arthur Lee Allen.
Don't call me Arthur.
Yeah.
No one calls me. And he's working at a hardware store, and they look at each other, and it's like, I don't know, like you see like the face of obsession in Gyllenhaal, and the face of ambiguity, I guess, in Lee Allen or Carolyn.
Well, like you said, it's almost like a throwaway scene, but you're right. Yeah, it's very much like, am I staring into the eyes of a murderer here? And does this guy know what I've done, kind of, so to speak?
So I've got a couple, if I can share.
Of course.
I'll keep it on Fincher's before, and believe it, I've actually got some for the Zodiac.
Okay.
5. But I would say one shot that I was completely blown away by was the digital overhead tracking shot of the cab. Right.
Oh, as a track, yes.
Yeah, that was almost like, I mean, I don't know if it was like, it's almost felt like it was on this aerial gyroscope. Then it was, as it was turning, it was coming around and following and just tracking that from a bird's eye view. I mean, it was absolutely incredible, right? And it's almost like turning, the streets of San Francisco into a bit of a murder map, right? In terms of how that sort of like bird's eye view, just following him around and literally like whipping around as the taxi's turning otherwise.
Yes.
I looked into this, and that apparently that particular shot was all digital.
Well, I found in my research that Fincher used a lot of CGI in this film and made that choice on purpose to do that, but obviously was trying to integrate it. It's not like, obviously this is not a big budget special effects style action thriller scenario thing where you need, you can tell when certain scenes are. But he actually did it to the point of, because it wasn't shot in San Francisco. Some exteriors were, but most of it was shot in LA, only on stages. So, obviously backgrounds, blues and green screens and so forth. But to the point that he actually, all the blood during the killings in Zodiac are all CGI.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Every single bit. And part of the reason he knew it would be faster. He did this because he also knew you'd have to stop, clean the costumes, get the people out of them, start again and have multiple copies of all the costumes. He didn't want to do that. Even to the point that he actually added hair to Jake Gyllenhaal's hand when you see the image where he draws like the mask, when he's wearing when he stabs the guys in the park and he wears the sort of hood, the sort of night style executioner hood.
Yes.
And he's drawn that. They actually added the hairs on Gyllenhaal's hand because Gyllenhaal's hand is hairier, and that's the artist. So they did that to match Gyllenhaal's hand. That's the extent he went to the amount of CGI he put into the film.
Incredible. And it makes sense that he wanted to cut down because one of the production facts was that it was a 110-day shoot, which is pretty extensive, and did actually include five weeks in the San Francisco Bay Area. But 110 days, it's pretty exhaustive. So to cut down on time and otherwise, probably savvy move. And apparently, the film actually came in under budget. So whether or not that's true or not, or otherwise, probably had a large part in Fincher's decision to actually go digital on some of those items.
Yeah, maybe it's easier to CGI blood than have 25 copies of the same costume.
So I've got another couple of shots that I really loved. One is obviously the iconic shot that's also used on many of the video, DVD, Blu-ray covers, which is that iconic shot of the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in fog. I mean, it's just amazing, right? It's almost like a visual metaphor for ambiguity, right? Just because you can't see through anything or really make out anything and see the very rough outline, if anything. So I thought that was really, really, really well done. It was just an amazing, it's like a painting, just seeing that shot. The other one for me would probably be, I've got two. Actually, I've got three more. No, I've got three more. So the other one is the opening. So that's the Blue Rock Springs attack, right? So this is the second attack.
Yeah.
And while we're on that, that's actually something that I'll throw to you about, because you got some good research on that, is it's just like a very, long, very calm, wide shot of the parked car. Fireworks are blooming sort of faintly in the background. And then the shooter's flashlight, but we don't know it's a shooter. So initially it's just a flashlight beam, sort of starts to, come through and, slice through the dark. And, just that juxtaposition of, the stillness with like the handheld sort of horror Blair Witchy sort of aspect of the light. There's no music, there's just sound and flashing light, and there's that, detachment, the distance that Fincher gets on a lot of his stuff. It always feels quite clinical. It just makes it chilling, right? And I think, sets the tone for, at times, what almost feels like a documentary at times, or almost, right? Because it is quite detached. And I thought that was incredible. I just, because it emotionally resonated with me, and I think it sets the tone for a lot of what you see. I also love the hooded Zodiac, killer scene in the Lake Berryessa attack. I mean, that was amazing. Like, you've got this beautiful, idyllic, natural light, and it's juxtaposed with, what feels like almost ritualistic violence. Yeah, right. It's really savage. Like, it's brutal.
No, it is.
Which I think is something that Fincher likes doing. Yeah. Right? Having those stark contrasts. And the last one was probably the time lapse of the construction of San Francisco, in particular the Transamerica Pyramid. So that's the...
Oh, yeah, when they do the four-year transition? Yeah. It's a really interesting... you know what? You're right. I didn't even think about that. It's a really great way to show time.
And like the other one as well, like the visual metaphor is that as San Francisco is growing and modernizing, the Zodiac case gets colder, right? So again, another juxtaposition that is used, to high effect by, Fincher and his creative team. So that's it for Zodiac. Okay. Do you have anything for the Zodiac, Jeff?
I don't think I had a favourite scene for that one, to be honest. I mean, very interested to see what you have. Maybe not necessarily a favourite, but good, excellent scene or well-done scene.
Yeah, look, it's more... Yeah, so the first one is the first attack, right? Yeah. Where you've got two teenagers parking their car. It's by dark, isolated roadside area. And it's just the moments before. It's like the prelude to the attack, the calm before the storm. Just there's something quite vulnerable and stark about that and how random it is because like there are other people there. Yes. But then it's them that get caught. And I thought that was really unsettling. Yeah. Right? I think it just sets it up really quite well. Just going, this killer is, he's a psychopath. Right? And there might be some form of grand design, but there is a huge element of, like randomness, chance or otherwise. Yeah. So I thought that was, like that wasn't nothing for me, I guess. The other one was, Justin Chambers' character as a detective. He's hunched over letters, sketches, cryptograms, and he's surrounded by evidence. Like, again, just the growing obsession that's kind of, created there and otherwise. And, and also, you can tell that he's getting stressed because he's smoking a lot, which they just seem to do throughout the film.
Oh, I don't think he's ever without a smoke in his hand.
Yeah, but I thought, just there was actually some nice moments of lighting, framing, and just kind of like the clutter. So productions, I think there was a few things that were working reasonably well together in that. So that way, I guess, and it wasn't, again, it's not nothing. It's not to the same, degree of high art that Fincher can do, seemingly effortlessly, but it was still interesting. The other interesting as well, and this goes to the heart of the focus and one of the central themes of the Zodiac is, the impact that it has, this like macro event and the micro impact it has on like, the household, the family. Right? Yeah. There's this quiet, almost still image inside sort of the family home. You've got obviously, Robin Tunney is the wife, Rory Culkin is the son, and just how his work is starting to, encroach more and more on their lives. I mean, you've got Rory trying to have some sort of connection with his dad by going out to the crime scenes and keep asking him, and then he goes into his office and, when he sneaks into the sheriff's office.
Goes through the file.
Goes through the files and otherwise. And just the display between, the public horror and then the sort of like the private pain and frustration that is starting to really, bubble and manifest and turn into something that, invariably, I think if the movie had an extra like 20 minutes, you see the dissolution of that marriage.
Probably, yes.
So, I think there was some good use of negative space and silence. and again, it just shows how the domestic bliss is starting to, as I said, really dissipate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Start to turn.
Unwind.
So I thought, again, not in the same high art, but worthy of mention.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's it for me in terms of shots and otherwise.
Yeah.
I think what we usually like to do now is sort of talk about other things that we liked and fun facts.
Well, yeah, there was some interesting, so a couple of interesting, I've got a few facts, if you'd like to hear some.
I'd love to.
So I was looking into some, we always was there any production stories or dramas or anything about that? This is one of those sets of Finchers that is famously known for Fincher demanding multiple takes, in some cases up to 70 or more on scenes in this film, which when he was pressed about it, Fincher described as, if an actor is going to let the role come to them, they can't resent the fact that I'm willing to wait as long as that takes. On the first day of production in San Francisco, we shot 56 takes of Mark and Jake, and it's the 56th take that's in the film.
Oh, wow.
Right? Now, Jake Gyllenhaal had massive issues with it and has called this out publicly, saying this sucked, I hated it, whereas Mark Ruffalo has been somewhat more effusive in seeing it as a requirement as an actor to deal with how a director takes his approach. So it was interesting. Again, potentially there you've got youth versus experience in terms of how that was handled. So what else have I got in regards to, I've got a few bits on Infamous, and I have one, I'll see what you have to say. I'd like to leave one piece of tribute to the end, and it's a Star Wars connection. I will leave that to the end.
Awesome.
So the Zodiac, shot entirely in 23 days. They did the whole film. Again,
wow.
Low budget, that's what it was. It was actually shot in 2005, as I said, and then released in 2006. They were insistent that all costumes and cars were as authentic as possible, so they went out there and sourced them all, even on a very tight budget, which I think was a job well done. And they actually did shoot mostly in that Vallejo area. So the entire production was pretty much shot in and around the Vallejo area where the first couple of murders occurred.
So,
yeah. Did you have anything on the Zodiac?
Yeah, so Mare Island, where apparently there was a naval base there from 1853 to 1996, and it's referenced in there because they thought at some stage one of the suspects could have come from a military background and potentially from there. So that naval base predominantly focused on naval ship construction. And the fun fact is the first prototype aircraft carrier was built there, as well as the first nuclear-powered submarine built on the west coast of the United States.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
That's kind of it.
All right. I've got a little bit more on, again, probably because of big budget, big more stuff on it. So on Zodiac. So again, this is pretty common. So Fincher, James Vanderbilt, and one of the producers, they spent 18 months doing research on this before they got to finishing the script and getting into production. They interviewed as many people as they could, as many people as possible. Fincher even hired a private investigator to find one of the survivors who was off the radar, similar to what's in the film, right? And as you and I were speaking about before we started recording, this is why Fincher's film doesn't show the first murder, because he was absolutely insistent that every of the attacks were verified attacks and had been verified and double verified by people involved, survivors, police, etc. Although it's commonly considered that the first murder in the Zodiac is involved, because they could never verify that because there were no survivors. That's why he doesn't actually show that killing scene. So here's a few other different bits and pieces. The original shooting script was 200 pages long because they obviously had an enormous amount of data. And Fincher actually asked the cast to speak faster than the normal cadence so that he could keep it claw back a few seconds at a time. Although it's not a short film by any stretch, to actually make it shorter, he asked them to speak faster. He actually employed a specific colour palette. Did you see that note? Did you find that in your research?
No, talk to me about the colour palette.
So, whereas normally a lot of Fincher's films are dull, quite browns and yellows and beiges and so forth, in Zodiac he actually went for a chilly blue colour theme throughout, and there's always something blue in every scene. And the decision, he undertook that because it was noted in the investigation that all the murders happened around water. So because of that, he chose to have blue as part of the colour theme because of that.
Fascinating.
So that was really interesting. The SFPD actually reopened the case after the film came out because it had been marked inactive in 2004. And so after that, and based on when the film came out, they reopened it. And then Gray Smith himself, when he saw the finished product, the only quote from him at the time was, "Oh my God, now I see my wife divorced me." because of the way they put up his obsession with getting the book written. So that was interesting. I'll save my last final one until you. What else did you find in looking around?
Yeah, so I've got a couple things. So the Lake Berryessa location, they actually had to helicopter trees to the location because it changed substantially since 1969. And Fincher obviously obsesses about the details and wanted the murder site to resemble as closely as possible what it was like back in 69.
Yeah.
I mean, that's next level. Mark Ruffalo met the character he was playing, David Toschi, and Ruffalo was really impressed that Toschi had perfect recall of almost every detail in the case. So again, talks to, I guess, a similarity that weaved throughout both films, and some of the central characters in this film is one about obsession. So it was like a mind worm, right? Once it got in, it wasn't getting out. So I thought that was really interesting and certainly on theme. So Nancy Slover was the Vallejo operator who took the first Zodiac call. Apparently, the production team behind Zodiac, Fincher Zodiac, they asked her to help provide some voice direction by selecting an audio recording of readings by various unidentified actors. After selecting the recording that sounded closest to Zodiac, it was revealed, funnily enough, that she'd selected a reading by John Carroll Lynch, who plays the prime suspect, Lee Allen.
Wow.
So again, that's kind of, again, like life imitating art.
That's a coincidence of coincidences.
I thought that was amazing. I've only got a couple of other things, Jeff. I mean, I say that and I end up giving you 6 or something. In multiple scenes throughout the film's soundtrack, a lone trumpet is frequently heard playing a 4-note motif, and is an homage to a piece by an American composer called Charles Ives. What was interesting, and the reason I'm calling this out, is that the piece is actually called The Unanswered Question.
Ah.
So again, like Fincher's just like, he's playing chess, like 3D chess when everyone else is playing checkers.
He's grandmastering it. He's that far ahead.
Yeah, 100%. So Fincher apparently, as a template for making this film, was Alan Jacob Pakula's All the President's Men that came out in 76.
Yeah, right.
So I thought that was pretty cool. So do I have anything else that's kind of interesting? So Fincher, to that point, he also had David Shire, who provided the music for All the President's Men, do so for Zodiac.
Yeah, nice.
Right? Just as a, just as a callback, and obviously, beyond just a template, there was, heavy inspiration he drew from that. I've got 2 other fun facts actually, but before I go there, the other thing I wanted to comment on was, this crossover that was happening that Fincher picks up. Well, there's kind of a couple of things that Fincher does, and he does it exceptionally well because it's showing, not telling, right? And, throughout the investigation and otherwise, right, where you had, a county sheriff and then someone from a local PD who was different to, like Vallejo PD, I think they were different to.
Yeah, because they all had different
SFPD.
jurisdictions.
And again, this is back in the analog times. And if there had been a central repository like a database or otherwise, and a way of sharing information from even just within the same state, right? Potentially this guy could have got caught and they could have acted a lot sooner, right? And just the way they sort of show that the tools they needed weren't in place to be able to empower them to do the job in the way that they wish they could do their job.
Yeah.
And just really smart how he showed that. And the other thing I thought was really interesting as well is, the sort of like the journalist as rock star / opportunist, and that how quickly, content was getting monetized in a very opportunistic fashion. And obviously they make that very strong parallel to the Dirty Harry movies. And obviously the first Dirty Harry has this, serial killer who also goes after a bus. And his name's Scorpio, and he's communicating with a cipher. And Mark Ruffalo's character even explicitly calls it out. And he goes, "Oh, how do you think it's going? They've already made a movie about it."
Yeah.
And I thought that was like just a really smart way of, sort of like portraying again, like, sort of the shifting cultural landscape and sort of what was happening, again, sort of like in the zeitgeist at the time, and sort of Hollywood picking up these themes and then running with them, probably ahead of where, things maybe could have been or should have been in an ideal state.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So now I've actually got 3 things for you. And one of them actually is a small Australian connection.
Okay.
So you're going to love this. So the first fun fact is that Fincher's film was edited using Final Cut Pro.
So was it one of the first to use Final Cut Pro?
I don't know that. I wish I had that for you. I don't know.
That'd be an interesting fact to look into.
But I thought that was interesting. The other interesting thing is that both the Warner Brothers and the Paramount logos used at the start of the film are almost identical to the ones used by the respective studios in 1969.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So obviously it wasn't 100%, because in the case of Warner Brothers, their 1969 releases did not use their classic shield as depicted in this film, but instead carried a Warner Brothers / Seven Arts logo, because the studio had merged at that time.
Yeah.
And the Paramount logo would have read a Gulf and Western Company in 1969. So obviously at the time of release, it was a Viacom company.
Yeah.
So a little bit different, but again, a nice callback to 1969.
Yeah.
Now, the Australian connection. So very obtuse and something only you and I would get.
Okay.
At around 43 minutes in the newsroom scene, the theme music that is used is by National 9 News in Australia that they were using in the 80s and the 90s.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can get some audio and put that up.
Wow. That's awesome. That's a great connection. That's a great connection.
But you know what's so awesome about that? Who came across that? How do you come across, again for them, oh yeah, hey, wasn't there that, Australian, free to air news network, and they had that really cool, or someone just heard it somewhere and jumped on it.
They must have thought it kind of fit for that time, almost that 70s kind of music, like a news thing. Wow, that's
Jeff,
that is a great fact.
Hey, you go, hang on, maybe the other way to read that, we should be offended.
Yeah.
Hey, you calling us backwards?
Yeah.
Well, we're using the 80s and 90s. You say it's 70s?
You were saying we were still back in 75 when we were in 1990? What?
Correct.
Wow, that's a good one. I like that Aussie connection. Nice one.
So that's it for fun facts. So
all right,
now you've been saving this.
I've got one that I've been saving for you. All right, so which I think you'll enjoy. Okay, we'll end on this Star Wars connection. Do you know what the Star Wars connection is between Fincher's Zodiac and, let's say, Fincher's Zodiac, because it's got real people in it, and Star Wars? Do you know?
I mean, other than they both have strong connections to San Francisco and otherwise. NFI, Jeff.
Okay, so in an interview in the 70s, George Lucas himself has said how much he was obsessed with the Zodiac Killer as well. Again, we know he's from Marin County. We know he's up there. He then famously went on to add a name of someone into Star Wars. Now, what does Luke Skywalker say when Uncle Owen asks him to go and clean the droids?
Oh.
But I wanted to go to Toschi Station to pick up some power converters. In the script, it's Toschi. He actually wrote it as Toschi Station. But obviously, Hamill pronounced it as Toschi Station. But it's actually, he called it Toschi Station after Dave Toschi, the detective.
Is that right?
Yeah, he actually did that.
That is super awesome.
So he put it in because he was so obsessed with it. He put Toschi Station because Dave Toschi was the lead investigator in the.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
So
that's great.
Everything's connected to Star Wars in some way.
All roads lead back, Jeff.
All right, my friend. I think we've covered that pretty well.
So as we like to do, ding, ding, ding. Who won the rematch, Jeff?
Look, again, you have to come down to the fact that we're talking about Fincher, and it has to. For me, it's Zodiac. Okay, like we've said all the way through, the Bulkleys got on and they made the film. I just think Fincher's film is just a masterpiece in filmmaking.
Yeah, no disagreements for me. I mean, it's Zodiac, Daylight, More Daylight, and then the other film. But I think also emerging out of the Zodiac, Alexander Bulkley. I mean, obviously showed that he really had creative metal and a lot to give. And you talked about, the wherewithal and the resourcefulness of getting, period-specific cars and otherwise. And that was obviously, again, the building blocks that led to an extremely successful producing career for him. So, so kind of like they both get some silverware.
Yeah, there you go. Yes. Yeah. But he gets a set of steak knives. He gets the silverware, right? For a second prize.
Third prize, you're fine.
Yeah, that's it.
Until next time, Jeff.
Thank you, mate. Talk soon, Justin.